It was a rainy evening in the heart of the city, the kind of evening where the streets shine like glass under the yellow streetlights, and people rush past each other with umbrellas, briefcases, and hurried steps. The rain tapped against cars and buildings, and the sidewalks were crowded with people trying to get home before the storm grew worse. In that rush, nobody seemed to notice the small, fragile figure sitting quietly on the edge of the pavement. She was an old woman. Her hair was gray and slightly wet from the drizzle. Her coat clung to her shoulders, and her hands trembled as she held tightly onto a blue handbag. She looked lost, almost invisible to the thousands of eyes that passed her. For most people, she was just part of the background, a stranger, someone who didn't matter in their busy lives. The truth was she had wandered too far from where she was supposed to be. Earlier that day, she had visited her doctor, a simple appointment she had made many times before. But somehow the streets she knew so well now looked different. Her memory betrayed her, and with each block, she felt more and more lost. The city that once felt familiar now felt like a maze. Her legs grew tired, her body weak, but the worst part was the loneliness, being surrounded by hundreds of people and yet feeling completely unseen. One man walked past in a sharp business suit, glancing at her briefly before checking his phone and moving on. A woman in a bright coat gave her a second look, but then shook her head as if telling herself it wasn't her problem. Some people even avoided eye contact entirely, stepping around her as if she wasn't there at all. The rain kept falling, and the old woman lowered her head, her heart sinking with every passing minute. She thought, "Is this it? Has the world truly changed so much that no one even cares anymore?" But in that very moment, as she sat alone in her fear, someone did notice. A young black teenager, probably no older than 17, walked by holding a small umbrella. Unlike the others, he didn't rush. He saw her clearly, sitting there on the wet pavement, and something in his heart told him he couldn't just keep walking. He stopped. At first, the old woman looked up in surprise. She wasn't used to anyone stopping for her anymore, and a part of her didn't even expect kindness. But the boy knelt down, holding the umbrella over her to shield her from the rain. He smiled gently and said, "Ma'am, are you okay? You look like you need some help." His voice was calm, warm, and full of respect. It wasn't the tone of someone pitying her. It was the tone of someone who cared. For a moment, she didn't answer. She searched his eyes, trying to see if he was sincere. And she found no judgment there, only genuine concern. I don't know where I am," she whispered. "I was supposed to go home, but I can't remember the way anymore." The boy nodded slowly, not once making her feel embarrassed for saying that. He didn't laugh or act impatient. Instead, he shifted his umbrella so it covered her more than himself. The raindrops fell on his own shoulder, but he didn't care. "Don't worry," he said softly. "I'll get you home soon." Those words, simple as they were, felt like light breaking through the storm. Around them, people still hurried past. Some glanced at the boy and the old woman, but no one stopped to help. The city was still moving fast, the world still cold. Yet in that small corner of the sidewalk, something different was happening, something human, something hopeful. The woman felt tears sting her eyes, though she tried to hold them back. She wasn't just lost on the street. She had been feeling lost in life too. Ever since her husband passed away and her children moved far away, she had been struggling with loneliness. She was surrounded by wealth, by a big home, by everything money could buy. But what she truly needed was kindness, someone who would simply care. And now, that kindness had come from someone she least expected. The boy carefully asked for her name, where she lived, and if she had any family nearby. His tone was gentle, almost like a grandson speaking to his grandmother. Even though she couldn't remember the full directions, she mentioned the name of her street. The boy quickly pulled out his phone, searching the map, trying to figure out how far it was. "It's okay, I know this area," he told her, standing up slowly and offering his hand. "Come on, let's get you out of this rain. I'll walk with you." The old woman hesitated for a moment. Trusting strangers was difficult, especially in a world that often taught fear. But looking at him, so sincere, so patient, she felt a rare sense of safety. She placed her frail hand into his and he helped her stand. Together they took the first steps down the wet sidewalk. He held the umbrella steady over her, even though the rain now soaked through his shirt. People kept walking past, some curious, some indifferent, but the boy didn't care. He wasn't looking for anyone's approval. All he cared about was making sure the woman beside him was safe. As they walked, she felt a strange warmth inside her chest, not from the umbrella, not from the warm drink he promised to get her soon, but from the fact that someone had seen her, someone had stopped, someone had cared when the rest of the world had walked by. For the boy, it wasn't about being a hero. He wasn't thinking about rewards or recognition. It was simply the right thing to do. To him, she wasn't a stranger. She was a human being who needed help. And that was the beginning. The moment when a busy city, a rainy night, and two souls from very different worlds crossed paths. The moment when one small choice, stopping, when no one else did, set in motion a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. The rain continued to fall, soft but steady, painting the city in silver streaks. The young man walked beside the old woman, umbrella tilted carefully so she stayed dry while his own shoulders grew darker with wet spots. He didn't mind. What mattered was that she wasn't alone anymore. Every step they took together felt different from the rush of the world around them. Cars sped by, people ran past, horns blared, and yet, inside that small circle of shelter under the umbrella, there was calm. The woman clung gently to his arm, her steps uncertain but trusting. For the first time in hours, she no longer felt invisible. The boy introduced himself as David. His voice carried a quiet strength, the kind that comes not from years but from heart. "Don't worry," he said with a small smile. "We'll figure this out together." The old woman gave him her name, Margaret. Even speaking it aloud reminded her of who she was, though lately she often felt like she was fading into the background of life. She explained in bits and pieces that she had been trying to get back home after her doctor's appointment but somehow lost her way. The familiar had turned unfamiliar, and the crowd only made her confusion worse. David listened without rushing her. He didn't cut her off, didn't look at his phone impatiently. He simply listened. That alone was a gift. "It's okay, Margaret," he assured her. "We'll get you home soon." As they walked, David noticed her shiver. Without thinking twice, he took off his jacket and gently draped it over her shoulders. She looked at him with wide, surprised eyes. "But then you'll be cold," she whispered. He shrugged with a grin. "I'll be fine. Besides, you need it more than me." Those small moments, the jacket, the umbrella tilted more toward her, the patience in his steps, spoke louder than any words. They weren't grand gestures, they were simple choices. Yet those choices revealed his heart. At one corner, they stopped to rest. David guided her toward the entrance of a small cafe glowing warmly against the rainy street. He asked if she'd like something warm to drink. She nodded softly, almost embarrassed at the thought of him spending money on her. But David walked inside and returned a few minutes later with 2 steaming cups of hot tea. When he handed her one, she felt the warmth not only in her hands but also deep inside her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. They sat together under the awning of the cafe, sipping tea as the rain poured harder. The city moved past them in hurried waves, but for that moment, it was as if time slowed down. Margaret glanced at him curiously. "Why did you stop for me?" she asked quietly. Everyone else just walked by. David thought for a moment before answering. "I guess I just couldn't ignore it. You looked like you needed someone. My grandma always told me that kindness costs nothing, but it means everything. I couldn't leave you there." Her eyes watered at his words, not from sadness, but from the reminder that compassion still existed in a world that often felt too cold. The rain eased after a while, and they continued their journey. David checked his phone for directions to the street she remembered. It wasn't far, but the walk would take time. He didn't complain. If anything, he seemed grateful for the chance to help. As they walked, Margaret noticed something else. While others avoided her, David walked proudly beside her. He didn't seem embarrassed to be seen helping an old woman. If anything, he looked protective, as if guarding something precious. At one crosswalk, a group of young people laughed as they passed, whispering and pointing. David heard them but didn't flinch. Instead, he tightened his grip gently on Margaret's arm and said, with a smile, "Ignore them. People will always talk, but what matters is doing what's right." Margaret looked at him in wonder. Such wisdom, spoken with such simplicity. She realized then that this boy wasn't just helping her. He was teaching her something too. Halfway down the street, she grew tired. David immediately noticed and guided her to a nearby bench. He encouraged her to rest, reminding her there was no rush. As she sat down, catching her breath, she thought back to the dozens of people who had passed her earlier without stopping. Any of them could have helped. But they didn't. And now, here was this teenager who owed her nothing, giving her everything: time, patience, care. She felt a quiet voice inside her whisper, "Perhaps he was meant to find me." David sat beside her, not checking his phone, not growing restless. He simply sat with her, letting her know she wasn't alone. They talked more, about the city, about school, about life. She learned that David was in his final year of high school, dreaming of becoming an engineer. But he admitted things weren't easy. His family struggled, money was tight, and college seemed like a faraway dream. Margaret listened with interest. She could hear the determination in his voice, the spark of someone who refused to give up. But she could also sense the weight he carried. For the first time in a long while, Margaret felt truly connected. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about him too. Two lives, from completely different worlds, crossing paths for a reason neither of them yet understood. Finally, after resting, they stood again. David offered his arm, and they continued down the glistening street. The rain had slowed, the sky beginning to clear, but the bond forming between them was only growing stronger. Margaret looked at him with quiet gratitude. She knew, deep down, that this night would change everything, not just for her, but for him as well. He thought he was simply helping a lost old woman, but in truth he was stepping into a story that would alter the course of his life forever. And with every step, Margaret's heart whispered the same thought. The world may have walked past me, but this boy stopped. And because he did, neither of us will ever be the same. The city was alive with noise, horns blaring, footsteps splashing in puddles, voices calling out in the distance. But for David and Margaret, the world had narrowed down to just the two of them under one umbrella. The rain had softened into a mist, leaving the streets glistening as if the city itself was covered in diamonds. David walked slowly, matching Margaret's pace, his young arm steady against her trembling one. Every so often he glanced at her, checking if she was all right, if she needed to stop again. He didn't rush her. He didn't push her. He treated her as if her time, her steps, her comfort mattered more than anything else. To Margaret, this kindness felt almost unreal. Just an hour earlier, she had been sitting hopelessly on the sidewalk, drenched, ignored, convinced that no one in the world cared, and now here was this boy, this teenager, making her feel seen, protected, even valued. They passed a busy intersection where dozens of people crowded under awnings to stay dry. Some looked at them curiously, whispering, but no one offered to help. Yet their stares didn't bother David. He held the umbrella high, shielding her from the droplets, his back straight, his steps firm. "Are you all right, Margaret?" he asked softly as they crossed the street. She nodded, though her legs felt heavy. "Yes, dear. As long as you're here, I feel safe." Her words made David's heart tighten. Safe. That was all he wanted her to feel. And so, when she stumbled, slightly, he adjusted instantly, catching her arm with care. He smiled. Don't worry. I've got you. As they continued, the rain began to soak through David's shirt, sticking to his skin. The umbrella was tilted more toward her, leaving half of him exposed. His shoes were damp, his hair glistened with drops, but still he didn't shift it back toward himself. He simply walked on, unbothered. They turned down a quieter street, where the sound of rain against rooftops was louder than the hum of cars. There, Margaret's strength faltered again. Her steps slowed, her breath came heavier, and she finally whispered, "I don't think I can go much farther." David immediately looked around. Across the street was a small bakery still open, its lights glowing warmly through fogged windows. Without hesitation, he guided her toward it. "Come on, let's take a break," he said gently. Inside, the air was warm, filled with the smell of fresh bread and pastries. The shop owner looked at them with surprise as they entered, an elderly woman leaning on a teenage boy, both damp from the rain. David asked politely if they could sit for a while, and the owner quickly offered them a table near the window. Margaret sank into the chair with relief. Her eyes closed for a moment, and she sighed, whispering, "Thank you. Thank you, David." He ordered a small pastry and another hot drink with the little money he had left. He placed it in front of her, smiling. "You need to eat something. It'll help." She looked at the pastry, then at him. "You've already done so much. Why spend your money on me?" David shrugged with an easy smile. "Because you need it. That's enough reason." For a moment, Margaret was silent. She was a woman who had lived through decades, seen the rise and fall of businesses, raised children, managed wealth beyond what most could imagine. But never had she felt such pure, selfless kindness from someone who had nothing to gain. As they ate quietly, Margaret studied him. His clothes were simple, his shoes worn, his phone cracked at the corner. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't someone with means. And yet he had given her more care than all the rich faces that had passed her by earlier. "David," she asked softly, "what do you dream of becoming one day?" He hesitated, then smiled shyly. "An engineer. I've always loved building things, but college is expensive. I don't know if I'll get there." Margaret felt a pang in her chest. His honesty, his humility, it stirred something inside her. Here was a boy who deserved the world, but life had given him struggles instead. She reached across the table and touched his hand lightly. "You will get there," she whispered. "I believe you will." After resting for a while, they left the bakery. The rain had eased into a drizzle and the streets were quieter now. As they walked, Margaret leaned a little more on David's arm, not from weakness alone, but from comfort. She trusted him. She felt as though fate had sent him to her that night, when she needed someone most. They continued toward the neighborhood, she faintly remembered. Street by street, corner by corner, David guided her, checking signs and asking gentle questions to spark her memory. At one point, she recognized a small park she used to pass often. Her eyes lit up. Yes, I know this place. We're close now." David smiled brightly, relief flooding his face. "See? We're almost there." They pressed on, their steps slower but steady. Along the way, David kept talking to her, telling small stories from his school, his neighborhood, even funny moments that made her laugh despite her exhaustion. Laughter. It had been so long since she laughed like that freely, without weight. And as they walked, Margaret realized something. This wasn't just a boy helping her home. This was life showing her something important. That kindness still existed, that compassion could come from the most unexpected places. By the time they reached the familiar gates of her neighborhood, the rain had nearly stopped. The sky was clearing, the street lamps glowing brighter against the wet pavement. Margaret stopped, tears brimming in her eyes as she looked at David. "You didn't just help me find my way home," she said softly. "You reminded me that there's still goodness in this world." David's smile was humble, almost shy. "I just did what anyone should do." But she shook her head firmly. No, my dear, not anyone would. Only someone with a heart like yours. And with that she knew. This boy was different. He had changed something in her tonight. And though he didn't know it yet, she was about to change everything for him. By the time they reached the quiet street, Margaret recognized the rain had stopped completely. The clouds parted just enough to reveal a silver glow from the moon, and the wet pavement reflected the streetlights like a polished mirror. Margaret's steps grew steadier now, as if her heart knew home was near. David walked beside her, still holding the umbrella, though it was no longer needed. He looked around curiously. This neighborhood was unlike any he had ever visited before. The houses here weren't just houses, they were estates. Tall iron gates guarded massive driveways, gardens stretched wide behind trimmed hedges, and cars that cost more than he could ever dream of owning were parked neatly outside. He slowed a little, unsure if he was in the right place. "Are you sure this is where you live, Margaret?" he asked gently. She nodded with a small smile. "Yes, dear. Just a little farther." They turned the corner, and suddenly David's eyes widened. Before them stood a grand mansion, tall, elegant, glowing with soft golden lights from within. The kind of home he had only ever seen in magazines or movies. It was breathtaking, with marble pillars, enormous windows, and a driveway large enough to fit an entire block's worth of cars. Margaret's steps faltered as she looked at the mansion. For a moment she seemed unsure again, almost hesitant. But then recognition spread across her face and relief washed over her. "Yes," she whispered. "This is it. This is my home." David stood frozen. He hadn't expected this. The woman he had helped all this time, so fragile, so lost, lived here, in a place like this? Before he could process it, the front doors burst open. A chauffeur and 2 house staff rushed out, their faces pale with shock. "Mrs. Whitmore," one of them cried. "We've been searching everywhere for you." They hurried to her, but Margaret raised a hand. "I'm all right," she said firmly, her voice stronger than before. She turned to David and squeezed his hand. "Thanks to him." The staff stared at the boy standing beside her, drenched, jacketless, holding a cheap umbrella that looked out of place in front of the mansion's grandeur. For a moment their expressions flickered with confusion, even disbelief, but Margaret's eyes silenced them. David, feeling suddenly out of place, stepped back. I'm glad you're home safe, ma'am," he said awkwardly. "I should probably get going now." But Margaret held onto his hand, refusing to let him slip away. Her eyes glistened as she looked at him. "No, David. Please, come inside. Just for a moment." He hesitated. He had never set foot in a house like this before. His world was one of small apartments, shared spaces, and stretching every dollar. This place, it wasn't just a different world, it was another universe. But the sincerity in her voice left no room for refusal. He nodded quietly. Inside, the mansion was even more stunning. Marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers. Paintings lined the walls, and the air smelled faintly of roses and expensive wood polish. David felt his throat tighten. He didn't belong here. Every step he took felt like he might leave, footprints where none should be. But Margaret walked proudly beside him, introducing him to her staff as though he were family. "This young man saved me tonight," she told them firmly. "He is the reason I am standing here safely. Remember his face. He is not a stranger. He is a blessing." David flushed, not knowing how to respond. He wasn't used to praise, certainly, not from someone like her. The staff brought them warm towels and offered David tea, which he politely declined at first, but Margaret insisted. "Sit, dear. You've done so much for me. Let me do something for you." As he sat on an elegant sofa, David looked around the grand living room. It was overwhelming. The fireplace, the gold accents, the shelves filled with books and artifacts from around the world. He could hardly imagine living in such a place. Margaret watched him quietly, a soft smile on her lips. She saw the way he looked around, not with envy, but with awe, and she realized something important. He wasn't impressed by her wealth. He wasn't interested in what she owned. He had helped her without knowing any of this. That was why she trusted him. After a while, she spoke, her voice gentle. "David, do you know who I am?" He shook his head honestly. "No, ma'am. I just knew you needed help." Her eyes softened. "My name is Margaret Whitmore. I am one of the largest investors in this city. People call me a billionaire, but tonight none of that mattered. Tonight I was just a lost old woman. And while everyone else walked past me, you stopped." David's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't say anything. He wasn't sure what to say. He wasn't the kind of person who met billionaires in real life. Margaret leaned forward, her gaze steady on him. "You didn't see my wealth. You didn't see power or money. You saw a human being. That's rare, David. Very rare." Silence filled the room for a moment, broken only by the faint crackle of the fireplace. David finally spoke, his voice soft. "I just did what I hoped someone would do for my grandma if she was lost." Margaret's heart swelled at his words. She realized then that the boy sitting before her was more than kind. He was wise, humble, and selfless. Qualities she had rarely found, even among the powerful people she dealt with every day. At that moment, she made a quiet decision. Helping her find her way home had been his gift to her. Now it was her turn to give him something in return. Something that could change his life forever. The fire crackled softly in the grand living room, casting a warm glow on the marble floor. David sat awkwardly on the edge of the sofa, his damp shoes resting lightly so as not to stain the rug that probably cost more than his family's entire apartment. He held the warm cup of tea in his hands, unsure how to act in a place like this. Margaret, now dressed in a fresh robe after her staff fussed over her, sat across from him. Her silver hair gleamed under the chandelier, her face calm, but her eyes filled with thought. She had been silent for a while, simply studying him. David shifted, uneasily, wondering if he should excuse himself and leave. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was quiet but carried the weight of someone used to being heard. "David, you changed something in me tonight." He looked up, surprised. "Me? I didn't do anything special. I just helped." Margaret shook her head firmly. "No, you did what hundreds of people chose not to do. In a city full of rushing feet and busy hearts, you were the one who stopped. That is not ordinary. That is extraordinary." David lowered his gaze, embarrassed. "I wasn't looking for anything in return, ma'am. I just didn't want to see you left there alone." "I know," she said gently. "And that is why it matters. You didn't help me because of who I am. You helped me because of who you are." Her words sank deep into his chest. He had never been praised like that before, not in this way. Most of his life was spent trying to prove himself. To teachers, to people who doubted him, to a world that didn't make things easy. But here this woman who had everything was telling him he had something priceless. Margaret leaned back, thoughtful. "Tell me, David, what do you want for your future?" He hesitated. Talking about dreams always felt dangerous. Dreams were fragile things when reality pressed hard against them. But something in her gaze, steady, kind, expectant, made him speak honestly. "I want to study engineering. I want to build things that help people. But college is expensive. My family barely manages as it is. I'll try, of course, I'll work hard. But sometimes it feels impossible." Margaret listened without interrupting. Her heart ached as he spoke. She had built empires, managed billions, but here was a boy with a heart bigger than his means, a dream blocked not by lack of will but by lack of opportunity. She stood slowly, walking over to him. With surprising strength for her age, she placed her hand on his shoulder. "David, you will not walk this road alone. From tonight forward, consider your future secured. I will personally sponsor your education. Whatever school you dream of, whatever tools you need, you will have them. No more worrying if it's possible. It is possible. You've earned it." David stared at her, his mouth opening but no words coming out. "What? You'd do that for me?" She smiled softly. I will, because you reminded me tonight that money has no meaning if it isn't used for good. You gave me something priceless, kindness when I felt invisible. Now it is my turn to give back. His chest tightened, emotions flooding him. He thought of his mother, who worked long hours to keep food on the table. He thought of the nights he stayed awake, wondering if college was only a dream. And now, here was the answer, delivered in a way he could never have imagined. Tears blurred his vision, but he quickly wiped them, not wanting to cry in front of her. Still, his voice trembled when he said, "Thank you. I don't even know how to repay you." Margaret squeezed his shoulder gently. "You already have, by being yourself." The staff, who had been standing quietly at a distance, exchanged glances. They were used to seeing wealthy visitors, powerful business partners, people who came for deals or favors, but this was different. They were witnessing something rare, the meeting of two hearts, one old and one young, joined not by money or status, but by compassion. The night grew late, and eventually, David rose to leave. Margaret insisted on having her chauffeur drive him home. As the car pulled up outside his modest apartment building, David stepped out, still in disbelief at everything that had happened. He turned back to see Margaret watching him from the window, her hand raised in a gentle wave. That night, David lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling. His clothes were still damp, his body tired from walking in the rain, but his heart felt lighter than ever. He realized something important. Sometimes the smallest choices, like stopping to help someone others ignore, can change the entire course of a life. And for Margaret, the night changed her too. She had always been surrounded by wealth, power, and people who respected her for what she owned. But she had forgotten what it felt like to be respected for who she was. David had reminded her of that truth. In her eyes, he wasn't just a boy anymore. He was family, the grandson she never knew she needed. In the weeks that followed, Margaret kept her promise. Papers were signed, scholarships arranged, and doors opened that David never thought he'd see. But the greatest gift wasn't the money, the education, or the opportunities. The greatest gift was the bond they shared, a bond that proved kindness is the most powerful currency in the world. The city never knew the full story. To most, it was just another night, another storm. But, for two souls who met under an umbrella, it became the night everything changed.